masing-masing karena kita akan melakukan pengambilan gambar bersama. Sekali lagi, tanpa mengurangi rasa hormat kepada seluruh hadirin sekalian, mohon untuk dapat mengaktifkan kamera dari device masing-masing. Baik, saya akan hitung, berikan senyuman terbaik Anda. 1, 2, 3. Slide berikutnya. 1, 2, 3. Slide berikutnya. Tetap berikan senyuman terbaik Anda. 1, 2, 3. Slide berikutnya. 1, 2, 3. Slide berikutnya, masih dengan posisi yang sama. 1, 2, 3. Slide berikutnya. 1. Baik, kami mohon untuk dapat mengaktifkan kamera terlebih dahulu. 1, 2, 3. Terima kasih. Baik, hadirin tamu undangan, seluruh peserta dan juga presenter yang kami hormati, marilah kita tutup acara pembukaan pada pagi hari ini dengan mengucap lafaz hamdalah. Akhir kata, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
The first presentation will be delivered by Professor Emeritus D. Gresham, followed by Professor Dr. Bhujan Rahman, MSI. Bhujan Suparman, PhD, will be acting as the moderator.
Yuk, pamit Pak Rekan ya. Pak Martoni izin duluan. Ada pelantikan.
Bhujan Suparman, PhD, is acting as Associate Professor. He finished his bachelor degree in English Department of IKIP Bandung in 1984. Having his master degree of Applied Linguistics in Monash University, Melbourne, Australia in 1995. And finished his doctoral degree of Applied Linguistics in 2003 from La Trobe University, Melbourne, Australia. For Bhujan Suparman, PhD, time is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to share very grateful to be honored as moderator in the of the second international conference on progressive education 2020 with the theme exploring the new era of education. Ladies and gentlemen, in the first session, we have very great presenters two great presenters. The first one, Professor Emeritus Stephen D. Gresham from UCLA, California. He's a very famous professor on applied linguistics. In fact, I'm one of his students, and some of his books and also article was used, including in Lampung University. And all the students of English department also use his theory. One of them is on input hypothesis and also second language acquisition. The second one, Professor Bhujan Rahman from Lampung University. Ladies and gentlemen, before starting with the first presentation, with the first session, I'd like to read curriculum vitae of each of the presenters. Professor Emeritus Stephen D. Gresham. He got his PhD in linguistics from UCLA in 1972. Before that, in 1969, he was awarded MA in linguistics from UCLA. And in 1968, he was awarded certificate in teaching English as a second language from UCLA. Before that, in 1964, he got BA in liberal arts music from University of Illinois. Concerning with his employment, in 2003, he was awarded Professor Emeritus of Education from USC. In 2002, he was awarded a Professor of Education by USC. In 1994, he was awarded Professor of Linguistics by USC. And in 1981, he was Associate Professor of Linguistics in the University of Southern California, acting chair from 1979 up to 1980. In 1975, he was Assistant Professor of Linguistics and Director of English Language Institutes and ESL programs, Queen College, New York. And something that, there are still more, but something that was amazing for us is that he was a teacher. Yeah, he was a teacher. Eight English cop in He was also keynote speakers in many events, international events, but it's not necessary for me to address all because of the limitation of the time. He also awarded many awards from international institutions. And then he also published many publications, and based on my observation, there are more than 40 pages of his publication. He is very productive. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the second presenter. I'm going to read their curriculum vitae first, so that after that we are going to continue with the presentation. The second presenter is Professor Dr. Bhujan Rahman from Lampung University. He is also very productive in writing many articles and publishing journals, okay? One of them is Asia Academic Quality Management as a means for improving institution productivity strategic factor in teaching training in Lampung, which was published in Asian Journal of Education in 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, this first plenary session will be divided into 3 sessions. The first one, presentation by each keynote speaker, which will last around 30 minutes. Less might be better. Less than 30 minutes might be better. So, Professor Kids Stephen D. Gresham will be from now up to 30 minutes later. And then after that, followed by the second presenter, Professor Bhujan Rahman, for another 30 minutes. And after that, the last session will be question and answer for about 30 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the first presenter, Professor Stephen D. Gresham. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One person hears me. That's enough. Good. Okay. I
Yeah,
want to talk
I
today.
can.
All right. I want to talk today about my passion for the last, 30 years. Stories. I want to talk about stories. Fiction. I think fiction and stories are the key to our improving education, making life easier, making school more effective, making life much more interesting. Children like to hear stories. Those of you with children, the studies have found that 95% of children like to hear stories. The 5% who don't like to hear stories, their parents don't enjoy telling them stories. Isn't that sad? But most people like them. And I have advice for people who are invited to a party and don't know anybody. This has happened to people here, right? You look around, they're all strangers. If you think that's going to happen, go to the movies and watch the last 3 hit movies. Then you can go up to anybody there and you can say, have you seen Terminator 29? And someone will have seen it and they'll want to tell you about it, and you'll have some very interesting conversations. It's about stories, and language teaching will do much better when we take that into consideration. I got interested in stories even more about 15 years ago. I live near Los Angeles. I live about 25 kilometers from the city. And I go into the city about twice a week for 2 reasons. The first is the most important. That's where my grandchildren live. So I get to see my grandchildren and play with them and see them. And then I also like to go to Gold's Gym, where Arnold works out. Okay, that's in Venice, California. So I go there too. And I can do both on one trip. Now, the trip itself is about 40 minutes, and it's not very interesting. And I really get tired of listening to the news, especially now. Don't get me started. Anyway, so I started getting some audiobooks, got them free from the library. I didn't want to get heavy audiobooks. I didn't want big, heavy, thick stories. I wanted light, easy stories that would make the trips pleasant. So I did that. Driving to the city and back has become a pleasure. I've been listening to popular literature. I've been listening to detective stories. I've been listening to medical novels. I've been listening to law novels. And you know what I've discovered? A lot of them are really good. The people who write these books are amazing. They're excellent. You know, we at the university, we look down on that stuff. You have to read the classics. No, it's everyday literature that's very, very good. Well, I want to tell you what we've learned, what I've learned about this over the last several decades. Reading that we choose ourselves, self-selected reading. What I've learned in the car, if you don't like the book, put it away, okay? I won't listen to it. Same thing, good readers do that. turn it aside, read something else. Self-selected pleasure reading is the secret to success in language acquisition, literacy development, first language, second language. Things that you decide you want to listen to or you want to read. There's a famous quote by an American humorist about self-selection. His name is Garrison Keillor. And when he was in college and university, he studied English literature. And he says, when my friends find out that I was an English literature major, they always buy me classic books. On my shelf, I have books by the Bronte sisters, early plays by Shakespeare all over. And I pass by this shelf, and there are the books staring down at me, making me feel guilty because I haven't read any of them, not one. It's got to be something you select by itself. Otherwise, it doesn't count. It won't help you that much. I find for myself, when we're talking about fiction, I don't really pay attention when people make recommendations. When they tell me about nonfiction and work in my field, I pay very careful attention. But when it comes to storybooks, it has to be something that I think is really good. So I don't listen to people when they make recommendations, except for one person. There's one person, when he recommends something, I immediately start reading it because he knows me better than I know myself. He knows what I need to read at every moment, and that's my son, who's now a professor of mathematics. Can you imagine that? Algebraic geometry, topology, all that stuff. But in general, we only like to read what we select. It has to be not just interesting, it has to be compelling. Compelling means so interesting that you forget that you're listening to a story. If it's another language, you forget that it's in another language. Only the story exists. Here's what the research says about pleasure reading and listening to good stories. It is the source of most of our language development. It's the source of our vocabulary. It's the source of our spelling. It's the source of our writing style. All that comes from reading. I'm very proud of this next one. I wrote a letter to the Washington Post about 7 years ago. No, 5 years ago, and they published it. You can find it on my website. I wrote a letter about Donald Trump. There's a lot of articles in the Washington Post about Donald Trump and the fact that he's not a good speller. He writes all these tweets. Sometimes he stays up all night and he makes lots of spelling mistakes. And people were writing in defending Trump. Oh my gosh, they're saying it's only spelling. He should proofread. He's not the proofreader in chief. He's the commander in chief, all that. So I wrote my letter. I said, people who are poor spellers, that's really quite interesting. We really do have to pay attention. The work I've done at the university, and I'm paraphrasing my letter, says that spelling largely comes from reading. If you're a good reader and you read a lot, it won't make you a perfect speller, but you're much better than someone who hardly reads at all. Not only does reading give you spelling, it gives you vocabulary. Study after study, people who read more always have larger vocabularies. People who read more write better. They read a lot and they get a style of how prose should work. Let me go on. It gets even more exciting, and we'll return to Donald Trump and why I'm doing this. Not only does pleasure reading, fiction reading, gives you language, it gives you knowledge. This is Keith Stanovich's work at the University of Michigan. People who read more know more about everything. They know more about literature. That makes sense. They know more about history, social studies. They know more about science. They know more about practical, everyday matters. It also develops what they call habits of mind. I found this in a major article in Scientific American, which I read right away and found the rest of the literature on this. Reading fiction helps you develop empathy for others, makes you understand others better. Terry Gross, a famous radio star here the United States, says, when you read fiction, you're learning to be someone else. You're learning to see the world through their eyes. You become the protagonist. You have to make the decisions. You meet other people constantly in books, far more than you can do it in the real world. It also tells you, reading fiction, that simple solutions don't work very well. The world is very, very complicated. I just finally read Murder on the Orient Express. Oh my goodness, talk about complicated. The characters in there have very complicated lives, and you learn all about them, what their motivations are, what they're doing, etc. So I wrote a letter, and I said, Mr. Trump's spelling means there's a serious problem. Because he not only has trouble spelling, he has trouble with vocabulary, he has trouble writing, he certainly doesn't know much about geography, he doesn't know much about history. He was in Israel a couple of years ago, and he was on his way to the airport, and he said, well, I'm in Israel, now I'm on my way to the Middle East. Where do you think you are? You know, it's this kind of mistake all the time. He doesn't know the name of leaders of other countries. He doesn't breathe. And he certainly loves simple solutions. The wall that he's building between the United States and Mexico, which is a crazy idea, waste of money, time. He's full of ideas like this, and his ideas of what we should do about the coronavirus. Oh my goodness. Well, I am performing my duty, by the way, as a patriotic American citizen by criticizing the president. It was President Theodore Roosevelt who said, it is the citizen's obligation to criticize the president when he thinks the president is wrong. Not to do that is treasonous. So I am simply exercising my obligations as a citizen, and I feel much better. Thank you. Well, that's what reading does for you. It does all these things, habits of mind, language, etc. So what's the problem? The problem is access to books, especially with children of poverty. Wow. We keep thinking kids these days aren't reading. Everywhere I go, people say that. I wrote a review article on this, and I looked at the United States, and they were announcing that children don't like to read way back in 1905, then again in 1912, and then again in 1925. It's never been true. Children, young people do read. In fact, the studies I've done, they read just as much, if not more, than their parents and grandparents did, except for one group: children who grow up in poverty. Children who grow up in poverty have very little access to books. They have fewer books in the home. They go to schools with fewer books. The libraries are not as good. This is the problem, and it's a problem that I think is fairly easy to solve. Our major problem is, of course, poverty. Poverty means three things. It means no access to food, very little access to food. Susan Ohanian says that very well. There's an expression, no child left behind. She changed it, no child left unfed. Children, that needs to be a right. We need to make sure that happens. The other need medical attention. All children should have the right to good medical attention, go to the doctor when they need it. And my third thing, books. Children need access to books. We cannot leave this to chance. Let me tell you about a research study that I participated in a few years ago. And I think it's the most important study that I was ever involved with. I did it in collaboration with two of my former students. One is a professor in Taiwan, Sian Lee. She does brilliant work, in my opinion. The other is Jeff McQuillan, who is also a PhD, who is now independent. And I call him the most dangerous person in education, because he keeps writing these brilliant articles, wanting to see if these myths about learning and life are true, and they're not. So he has a blog called Backseat Linguist, and I strongly recommend it. Anyway, I did that article with them, and here's what we found. We looked at the Pearls examination. You've heard of this. This is this big examination that's given to 10-year-old children, fourth graders, in like 40 different countries all over the world. We got the scores on Pearls. I've looked at scores in Pearls 2007, Pearls 2011, Pearls 2016. Whenever the exam is given, the newspapers go crazy. They want to know who won. France wants to know if they beat Germany. Italy wants to know if they beat France. All over the world. Korea wants to know if it beat China, etc. Alfie Cohn, who's a brilliant commenter on all this, says the scores on Pearls should be announced in the sports section of the newspaper, because that's really what it is. What the Pearls organization also did, though, they published the scores and they gave the children questionnaires. And we used the results of those questionnaires. That was C.N. Lee and Jeff McQuillan. And we used the results and did some statistical analysis, okay? Here's what we found. The biggest predictor of scores on a reading test given to 10-year-old children, the biggest predictor, without question, how much reading you have access to, the print environment, how much you read, how much print you have access to. Overwhelmingly, not even close. And the other research has confirmed this. Access to books, which means more reading, those are the big predictors, not if you study spelling and phonics and all that stuff. Wow. We also found that if the school had a good library, that the first time we did it nearly balanced the effect of poverty. Let me say this again. A good library came close to balancing, making up to the effect of poverty. Wow. The reason they don't read well is they don't have access to books. Give them books and they read a lot better. First time we did it nearly made up for it. Second time in 2011, it made up for 40% of the effect of poverty. 2016, it made up for 60% of the effects of poverty. It's a big, big help. Now, let me tell you what didn't work. The committee looked to see how much instruction in reading the children were getting. Hours of instruction. Now, when you say instruction in reading, that's nearly always vocabulary and phonics. You know, the alphabet, and how does that work? First time we did it, negative impact. Second time, zero impact. It didn't matter. What matters is books and libraries. They also asked students, and the third time they did this is 2016, the most recent. If the children could come to school in kindergarten and they knew a few letters of the alphabet and they could write their names, did they become better readers? No. It had absolutely no effect. In fact, it was mildly negative. Not phonics, not drills and exercises, not vocabulary study, not flashcards, stories and books. Listen to the teacher read books aloud, etc. I'll tell you what I think is the most outstanding study of this, and this was done with my colleague, Beniko Mason, works in Japan. She retired last year. She worked in a school in which she was responsible. In addition to her university research, she also gave a class in English as a foreign language for people who just wanted to take the class, and they would come from the community. Class consisted of two things. Number one, in class, reading in English, graded readers, the simple books. The second thing was, oh, I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. Let's rewind a little. In class, she told them stories. Classic stories that, in her words, have stood the test of time. Things like Grimm fairy tales, etc. At home and in class, they did a little bit of reading, and at home, they read for pleasure from simplified readers, which, by the way, are getting better and better and better. So they're really getting interesting. I've been reading them in Spanish. I'll tell you about it if we have time. Anyway, the people in these classes ranged anywhere from people in their 20s. One man came, he was in his 70s. They also decided on their own what they wanted to read. Some help from the teacher in the beginning, but eventually self-selected. Here is her most, I think, spectacular result, and it has been replicated several times. The more they read, the better they did on standardized test. The test she gave them was the TOEIC test. Some of you have heard of this. She used the reading comprehension and the listening comprehension part. Her results. For every hour these students, young people, read for pleasure books they liked, they gained 1/2 point on the TOEIC. Now, some of you know the TOEIC, note that it ranges from 250 all the way up to 1,000, okay? So if they read for 1 year, say 3 hours a day, they could go up 150 points on the TOEIC, which is a lot. You do that for 3 years, they can go all the way from the bottom level to just about the absolute highest level and get lots and lots of academic language. So this is big stuff. They weren't doing anything else. They weren't studying vocabulary. They weren't rewriting the stories, nothing like that. They were simply reading and having a good time. Which would you rather do? Spend some time each day reading what you want to read, or do exercises from a book that you buy, which is very expensive, where you have to study hard? Well, we know it's the reading that's the most pleasant, and it's the reading that really works. Well, I've given you an idea of which group don't have the reading. Second language acquirers don't have all the reading either. I would look, if we're interested in English and I were in Indonesia, I would look at the bookstores to make sure they have good books in English that are interesting and comprehensible, that are affordable, and a lot of them should be made available for free. Countries are worried about English competence, etc. Make sure there's a lot of good books for them to read from their school library, from their local library, and make sure the books are affordable in bookstores. That's what I would do first. Now, we have a tradition in the United States in our bilingual programs of doing what's called heritage language. I know in this country, Indonesia, there are lots of other languages that children speak, and sometimes there are programs to help them. My colleague, Nishan Ashtari, looked at what was the situation in Farsi. Farsi spoken in Persia. There is a pretty extensive, hundreds of thousands of speakers just in the Los Angeles area, which is where she was. And she did a number of studies that came to the same conclusion. She went to the files at the library and looked at the computer files of all 72 public libraries in the city of Los Angeles and looked to see how many books there were in Farsi. 300, that's all. And only 12 were taken out at that time. The answer is so simple: providing access, lots of it, to good, interesting books that children really want to read. Well, I have one more research result for you, which I thought was quite clever, even though it was my study. We wanted to know why kids were reading and why they weren't reading. So we did a study in 2 different places. One version of it we did in the United States, in several Western states, okay? And the other we did in China. We did in Mandarin-speaking area in China, books in Chinese, asking them questions about their reading. We asked them, how much do you read for pleasure? And they could say, not very much, a little, a lot, a lot. How much do your classmates read? Every place we did the study, the children said they read more than their classmates. Now, think about that. That can't be true. The same children were asked about themselves and about their classmates. So they had the impression, people have the impression that other people aren't reading because we don't see them reading. But a huge amount of reading is going on. We still have a problem. We need more books for children living in poverty. We need to continue to support our library. We need more books for students doing second languages, foreign languages. We need them for heritage languages, etc. And it's not the classics. They will get to the classics. They will get academic language. We don't have to worry about that. I'll tell you about one study that my former student, Jeff McQuillan, found. It's one of many. He found authors who examined science fiction. he looked at how much science fiction it would take to build up a knowledge of the scientific vocabulary. These people he cited found that 1 year of reading of science fiction that you select yourself gives you about half of the technical vocabulary you need for all areas of science. And I'll tell you one more study, because it's about a person I love a great deal. My cousin Evelyn, I got to tell you about Evelyn. First, I'll tell you why I think she's wonderful. She's 93 now. When I was a little boy, she was much older, okay? And she was always so good to me, so nice. I used to go to her house and visit her and her late husband, Marty. And Evelyn became my mom's best friend. So what can I do, okay? An aunt-niece relationship. I was talking to Evelyn on the phone recently, about 2 months ago. And Evelyn said that her late husband, Marty, had a degree in law. And she was always impressed by how much he knew about the law and how useful it was to know about legal matters. So she told me, Stephen, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the university and I'm going to take a class on law, beginning law. And I said, I got another idea. Read some novels. Read novels by John Grisham. John Grisham writes legal stories. I listen to his books in the car all the time. I don't care about the law, but boy, were they interesting. Fascinating, good writer. Evelyn has been reading law novels for the last 3 months. I ordered them on the computer for her, and I get them sent to Evelyn, and I can deduct them from my taxes because I'm telling you about them. It's part of the theory, okay? So we're all giving Evelyn a break on this. She's doing this. Oh, I wish I had read, there was one of his called The Runaway Jury. I wish I had read it before I was the chairman of the jury. I would have been much, much more effective. So we are finding that fiction teaches you things, gives you language, helps you as a person. It is win-win and it is pleasant. My final words, let's allow the children to do what we do all the time anyway. Read a good book. Make sure they're available. I went a little bit over. Thank you very much. Time for questions. Or should I
Thank you
ask-
very much. Yeah, thank you very much,
Sir.
Prof. Gresham. The time really still have 7 minutes more. Okay. Now we are come to the second presenter, Professor Dr. Bhujan Rahman. Time is yours.
Tes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, all of the participants of the International Conference on Progressive Education 2020. The terms is exploring the new era of education. When I read the term of this international conference, exploring the new era of education, I try to find the definition of the new era of education. What is the new era of education? Even though many experts make definition about the new era of education, is the digital education. Education by using the modern technology, modern information technology, and the teaching and learning process. I think it's okay. It's good definition because technology is one the most important factor in the education process. But we also can see the difference, implements or apply the technology in many countries in the world. If we see in a developed country, maybe applying modern technology and education process, it is very, very okay, including in the developing countries. I think it is no problem how to apply the modern technology and education process. But if you look at the underdeveloped country, applying modern technology still is a problem in educational process. So we still have the problem about how to define the new era of education. Even if we analyze for the inner perspective, there are two terms about education: educating and teaching. Is there similar between education and teaching? Does the teacher teaching including educating? The different definition about teaching and education, it is give special effect how to define, how to find the definition of new era of education. The end of teaching, according to me, very different with the ends of education. Teaching focus to how to deliver, how to transfer knowledge, how to transfer skill from the teacher, from the learning resources to the students. But education or educating not only how to transfer knowledge from the learning resources to the students, but educating should how to internalize value, norms, wise to the students. So knowledge only bridging in the educational process, not the end of education. If we look at the new era of education, only how to apply the modern technology, so we give definition, education is similar as teaching. I think it is one of the crucial discussion about how to give definition about new era of education. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, in my presentation, I want to elaborate the topic new era of education, which the another era. We know that COVID-19 pandemic still hits in many countries, even all of the countries in the world. So I want to elaborate the new era of education from the COVID-19 pandemic's perspective. I want to show my presentation. Yeah. I want to take the example from Indonesia, my country. We call this era is the new era, no new era, but new normal era. new normal era during the COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. And the new normal era in Indonesia gives special effect on educational process. We know that education determines the future of nation and state, even mankind and the universe. Therefore, education process cannot be stopped. Stopping education process, it means destroying the future civilization of mankind. And all countries in the world agree that the COVID-19 pandemic must not stop the educational process. So now we are talking about education during and post the COVID-19 pandemic. My presentation will describe learning empowerment in the new era or the new normal of education. The new normal rise new atmosphere and fall of education. Some of the new performance that characterize the new normal era, such as social distancing, no direct contact, and using the mask. Yeah, as saw in the presentation. There is no face-to-face between teacher and students, and also no face-to-face among the students. Almost country apply online learning and the teaching and learning process and educational process. Of course, there are a lot of different things between face-to-face classroom learning and online learning. The difference we can see from how to make interaction between teacher and students, how to design the course, how to select the tool to make good communication, and so on. The shift from face-to-face to online learning also have an impact on psychological for children. The family atmosphere gives special effect to students and online learning activity. All the factors have to prepare well to get successful and implement online learning. This is the data from UNESCO. Over the past 10 days, the numbers gimana? Ya, minum mas. Okay. Over the past 10 days, the number of students affected by school and university closes in 138 countries has nearly quadrupled to 1.37 billion, representing more than 3 out of 4 children and the youth worldwide. In addition, nearly 16.2 million teachers are no longer in the classroom. It is the fact in the words. And the data back on March 2020. As the COVID-19 pandemic has spread across the globe, a majority of countries have announced the temporary closure of schools, impacting more than 91% of students worldwide, around 1.6 billion children and young people, according to UNESCO April 2020. This is the special data. Still according to the UNESCO, More than 3 million students are out of school in Rwanda, since the government's recommended school close to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. To keep children learning, the country has turned to one of the most accessible mediums, radio. Only radio, no handphone, no internet, and other. But with radio, it's the facts. So, new normal, raise new paradigm of education. New normal shift teaching and learning by face-to-face learning in classroom to shift to online learning. Okay. And the next, how to design a curriculum and the new normal era and the post-COVID-19 era. One thing I want to show that the new curriculum and the post-COVID by the online learning process, the teaching and learning, not how to teach well. So the most program is not how to improve the capacity, the competence of teacher, how to teach well. But the priority program is how do students learn? Because the student can learn not only at school, but student can learn everywhere. Student learn not when the teacher is teaching, but when the teacher invites students to learn. So the student is not as a subordinate from the teacher, but student is the partnership for teaching and learning process together between teacher and the students. So learning is not instructions by the teacher, but how to make learning is a necessity. So student will learn, will do the learning, not only by the instruction for the teacher, but every time, everywhere, student can learn what they meet the problem and their environments. So learning is not task, learning is not job, learning is a necessity. How to design our curriculum, our teaching and learning process to be learning is not instruction by the teacher, but learning is the necessity for students. Okay. And the next, in the new normal, we have to make the new habits in the communication or interaction as other. As I mentioned just now, the new normal, we make communication and the social distancing and using the mask, and we cannot direct contact. It is one of the characterize the new normal during and post COVID-19 pandemic. But we have to know, we have to understand that not every student is happy, enjoy during learning at home. They really want to hang out with their friends. They really want to play with their friends. But actually, they are both stay at home all the time. So, how to make good communication, how to make good interaction, and the online process, it is one thing and very important we have to design, we have to create. Online education may not spirit it, among the student each other. But online communication always must make the good interaction each students and all of the process teaching and learning. If we change to the school, in the normal situation, school is one of the best place for students to do learning, to learn. But in the new normal situation, and including in the new era of education, new digital era of education, school is a learning resources. How to make school not only place to learn for the students, but school has shift from the place to learn to a learning resources. School has to provide the tools how to make good communication between teacher and students and among the students, and school has to provide the appropriate content, appropriate course for teaching and learning for online learning activity. In the next, one variable we may not remember about social emotional learning. As I mentioned, that not all students happy, enjoy learning at home because they miss the friend, because they want to play with the friend, because they want to make something new with the friends. So socio-emotional, very, very important factor and learning and teaching process by the online learning approach. Actually, the student both stay at home all the time. There are the psychological factors what we have to consider in the online learning activity. In some cases, for example, in Indonesia, online learning is applied by giving assignment to students. Teaching and learning apply by giving assignment to the students. We cannot imagine if there are 4 to 5 subjects every day and its teacher give assignments. How do students finish? How do students work at home? Because many tasks, many assignments, student has to finish every day. So it can make the students stress and depression. Therefore, the social emotional learning, it is the most important for the get the learning, online learning activity. And the last was one of the most important to get success in learning, online learning activity. It is the readiness of teacher on learning transition. For many countries, online learning is not yet a structured project. It is impromptu program to keep students learn during COVID-19 pandemic. So it can be understood that many countries are not ready to implement online learning. Not only students, but teachers, parents, even the school manager are not ready. In this case, teacher is influential party in the successful of the online learning because teacher provides the content, strategy, and tools for online learning activity. So needed special program, special creation to improve teacher readiness on implementation of online learning and during and post COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's all my presentation. Thank you very much. Good morning and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Bhujan Rahman, for your interesting presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the last session, question and answer. Right. If you want to put forward some question, please type it on the chat. For the time being, there is a question from Prof. Cucu. Let me see. Right. There is a question from Prof. Cucu Sutarsah, FKIP Lampung University, addressed to Professor Gresham. His question is like this: I'm such an avid reader. When I was a child, I have the privilege from my parents to read a lot of books. That makes me read lots of books, from fiction to non-fiction genre. Now, I also teach English to young learners course. I once taught English for kids in kindergarten and teach university students. Unfortunately, my students do not really like reading. They are more attached to gadgets and social media. This happened to my niece and my nephew. I even ambitiously asked them to read Harry Potter, because when I was at their age, I love reading Harry Potter so much. But the result is neither. They still don't like it. How did you make your children and maybe grandchildren love reading, love books, especially in the social media and gadget area, which seems more appealing for the kid? That's one of the questions addressed for Prof. Gresham. Okay, the time is yours. Prof. Gresham, please turn on your mic. We couldn't hear your voice.
Okay, the answer is comic books, graphic novels. Let me repeat, comic books, graphic novels. Children who read more comics turn out to be readers, and they grow into reading books.
And we never give up our habit of reading comics. I never have, and I found today's comic books, not all are great, not all are fantastic, but many of them are good literature. They're more complex than spoken language, and they're a wonderful stepping stone to hardcover and softcover books. Easy, light, friendly reading. It happened to me. I'll tell you one story. I was in the 3rd grade, put in the low reader group. My father wanted me to get better. He said, from now on, you have an unlimited budget for comics. You can have all you want. I became a fanatic comic book reader. Within a few months, I was in the most advanced group. It happened very quickly.
Thank you.
Prof. Gresham, that's the first question. Really, that question not from Cucu Starsa, but from Rafista Devianti. Now, the question from Prof. Cucu Starsa. Yeah. Chomsky mentioned that in acquiring language, the children have an active contribution of the child and minimize the importance of the imitation and reinforcement. He mentioned that the child knowledge of his mother tongue was derived from the universal grammar. I was wondering, to this statement, I need your clarification. Thank you. That's the second question.
I think there can be no doubt that Chomsky was correct in saying that the fact that languages don't wander around. They are constrained. Only certain kinds of rules can happen. There are universals, and this makes the job of language acquisition possible. It has to be correct. So I think there are universal grammar, And another universal is that we all acquire language the same way. We all do it by understanding what we read and understanding what we hear. So I think that is an incontestable hypothesis. I think it must be true.
Thank you very much. Any other question, please? Okay, if you want to say, if it must to put some question, just raise your hand.
I think it must be true.
Yes, Prof. Yeah, all right. From, please tell your name and your institution.
Thank you very much for the time given to me. My name is Dr. Asnawi Muslim from Syiah University, Aceh.
Just raise your hand.
This is very happy for me to see Prof. Gresham here because a lot of his book I quoted in my thesis or in my article sent to journal. And I'm very interested in your comments about the teaching method. Even though you are talking about the fiction, but today I'm going to know about the teaching method that we have learned and we have read from your books. You know, English in Indonesia as a foreign language. So we use such your method to teach our students English. But we have used your method for many years, but the students still could not understand or could not speak well English after graduating from the school. So is there something wrong with the method that we use, or is there something wrong from the lectures or teacher side, so that our students cannot speak or use English for communication well? So what is your comment for that situation? Thank you very much, Prof. Gresham.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Good question. Thank you.
If they read a lot of extremely interesting English, lots of it, they'll have no trouble writing, they'll have no trouble speaking, they'll have no trouble with anything. It means more and more books, more and more magazines, more and more comic books that are extremely interesting, that are so interesting they are in another world, that they no longer are aware they're reading English. Then it will happen.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question. This is from Fajar. Responding to your answer to Rafista's question earlier, there was a trend back then that reading comic was prohibited by most parents, and parents kept raising their kids to read academic books. How to overcome this issue?
Yes, well, that's what I'm working on. That is the goal. I'm a big fan, as you know, of comic books, etc. A book came out in the 1950s that attacked comic books. This was a New York psychiatrist, and he said that comic books are responsible for juvenile delinquency and turn students into criminals, lives of crime. And we know, we've done scientific research. We went to little Johnny's house. He was in trouble with the police, and they found comic books in his bedroom. Well, there were comic books in everybody's bedroom, so they really didn't matter. And when you look at large samples, there is really no connection. There's toothpaste in the kid's bathroom. Is that a source of crime? So it's very hard to make this causal. Anyway, there's a big public push against comics, light literature. The idea is that the only medicine that works is the medicine that doesn't taste good. It has to be bitter, otherwise it's not good for you. And we have found something that we think is just the opposite. I am not saying that if children like it, then it's good for them. We do a lot of things in school that are a lot of fun, but nobody learns. But this one happens to satisfy both requirements. Reading good books, including many comic books, is not only pleasant, but it turns out that's exactly what we need. If you look at case histories, if you look at people who are highly literate, you will find they went through a stage of voluminous pleasure reading, just about everybody. So something must be.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question for Professor Bhujan Rahman from Hairun Nisa. The question is, social emotion is such a big problem that we have to consider in online learning, like you have mentioned in your presentation before. Can you, this is the question, can you give some suggestion to the teacher so that this problem can be minimized? Professor Bhujan Rahman, time is yours.
What we have seen in the research is that when teachers read a good story to the children, when they tell a story, when the children are involved in books, discipline problems go down. The kids are concerned with the story. And of course, as I mentioned in my talk, it is excellent for social emotional development. We learn from stories. So this is win-win. I know it's too good to be true, but it is true.
Right, okay. Prof. Bhujan Rahman, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. As we know, the actor of learning activity is students, not teachers. Once again, I want to emphasize that the actor of learning is students, not teachers. So we have to consider the emotional situation, the emotional condition of students before we design about teaching and learning by the online learning approach. Yeah. So the first step I want to recommend, the school has to make a kind of guidebook, the manual, how to do the online learning activity and during the pandemic and the post-pandemic. How to formulate the action plan, the lesson plan for doing the learning online activity in this era. This is the first step. And the second step, make good communication between teacher. Make good communication as teacher. Because we cannot give the assignment for the students to the students if the assignment cannot be finished by the students in the appropriate time. So every teacher has to calculate his or her assignments can be finished by the students on the appropriate time or not. Very important, because if we give the assignment to the students out of the time, it can make stress the students. And the third steps, how to design the teaching and learning process with the online learning activity, the enjoy learning. The assignment not only like homework, but the assignment can be the watching the video and then make common discussion between students, among the students, and between students to the teacher. So how to make learning is the enjoy process, enjoy activity in this era. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Bhujan Rahman, for your answer. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I believe that there are some questions put forward to both presenters. Unfortunately, the time limitation, which has to stop this session, right? Okay, thank you very much, Professor Stephen Gresham, Professor Bhujan Rahman, for your very interesting presentation. Okay, we hope that we can attend your presentation in another occasion. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to terminate this session. I say, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you,
Bhujan Rahman PhD, for moderating the keynote presentations.
Selanjutnya kami informasikan kepada seluruh peserta dan juga partisipan, mohon untuk dapat mengisi daftar hadir yang telah disediakan di kolom chat. Terima kasih. Hadirin undangan yang kami hormati dan seluruh peserta dan juga partisipan pada konferensi pagi hari ini. Agenda selanjutnya yaitu para session yang pertama. Untuk itu kami menginformasikan kepada seluruh peserta, dipersilakan untuk memasuki ruangan melalui link yang telah dibagikan oleh panitia. Dan selanjutnya kepada segenap tamu undangan, kami mengucapkan terima kasih karena telah berpartisipasi dalam mengikuti serangkaian acara pada pagi hari ini. Selanjutnya hadirin sekalian, kami persilahkan untuk dapat meninggalkan ruang virtual ini. Terima kasih.
For all keynote speakers and guests, you may leave the meeting room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Selanjutnya bagaimana?